Hi, Pete Orthman here from Mad Cow News. Last Tuesday was an important night with the commissioners meeting, and we're going to talk about one part of that right now. That part is the shooting range. Stand by for that. Last Tuesday, the Madison County Commissioners covered a lot of important issues, but apparently the one that's causing the most gossip and the most incorrect gossip is that of the shooting range. Gossip is an interesting thing where people don't even attend the meeting, but they somehow think that they know all these answers. They have all this information. And I kind of appreciate that gossip because now I'm going and videotaping these meetings so that we can separate the truth from the gossip. You like what the commissioners do, you don't like what they do, that's fine, but base it on factual information. And that is, in some quarters, a little rare. So here we have the video from Tuesday night's commissioner meeting where the discussion is the gun range.
Saleable, that is leasable, how long can we lease that for? I think is what they're doing.
Alan, of course, Norris and I were not in the game, but how did we get to this point with discussing a 100-year lease when we have not even seen a business plan from these people as to what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, how many people they're going to employ, what are they going to do for noise abatement, all the various issues that many people have brought to my attention and that I have brought to my own attention. To me, this is like going to a bank and getting the money and saying, I'll be back in a month and make application. How did this happen?
They have asked before to be able to give the briefing, and for various scheduling reasons that was not able to happen. And in fact, if you notice in my proposed letter, I really said that we believe the next step is for them to be able to come in and give their full briefing, and then let you and the public hear that. You can ask questions, and then if we want to do that the same night there's a public hearing, that might may be an appropriate way to set it up.
I think that has been requested in the past, and they didn't show up.
Well, and you also, in your letter to them, Alan, on November 21, indicated or stated in your letter that the answer was no on a 100-year lease.
Yes. Then
they come right back and ask for again in a separate kind of question. What am I missing here?
That was when the entire there was no purchase option, and so one of the things that will become obvious if you look into the map is that it sort of splits some of their plans in two, and so if they bought part of it, but we told them and that's your decision. I mean, to say this area is not for sale; it's only for lease. Sure, they're asking is it a 100-year lease, but I think what they're really after is how long can they plan for.
Let me, if I might, Mr. Attorney.
Part of the rumor is that the gun range would have brought 40 new jobs to Madison County.
At that meeting.
Totally incorrect. I've been to every one of the meetings. 4, with a possibility of 6 minimum wage jobs. Ooh, there's a terrible loss, isn't it? And we are going to rent that for $3,000 a year. That would annoy all the neighbors. Think about it, folks.
That had been
here's a video
in the past, and the question was, do we if we have a lease situation, then you can put conditions on a lease that would be harder to put in a deed as far as what can be done and rules and that kind of thing. However, if you do a long-term lease, we have to follow the general statutes for purchasing, and putting some of those restrictions in there. You know, we'd have to be very careful of how many restrictions we put in there.
Still, I'm lost with this purchase option. I don't know where it came into play.
I recall at that meeting, I did bring up the issue of if you were going to compare a 100-year lease to a purchase.
That's right.
A purchase would certainly be a better option in this particular instance. However, the reason a purchase was not appropriate from the county's perspective would be that in order to sell the property according to Diener's restrictions, you had to have certain engineering costs and studies done to determine whether or not the county could sell the property. And I think the indication is that the county was not interested in going to that expense to even be put in a position to sell the property.
Correct, because it
So
would be
based
an
upon that, a
expense.
sale would not, in this instance, probably even be less desirable than a 100-year lease. That's the way at least that's how I addressed it
Yes.
at that meeting, if my recollection's correct.
We told them no to that. They're always basically welcome to submit another offer, I think is what I was trying to communicate to them. I don't recall saying, no, go away, don't ever talk to us anymore. But the question was, no, we're not going to do a 100-year lease, and therefore the terms you propose for this 100-year lease are not acceptable. And so they're essentially, I think their intent here is they're still interested in making a proposal. They're just trying to figure out how to, how to package this rather than keep putting out stuff. No, I mean, because
Well, we as the board at the November meeting discussed a 10-year lease. And I think our attorney advised no more than 10 years.
that is right, because the laws and I have passed that along to them that there is a bigger difference in, I think it's 1 day shy of a 10-year lease, but
But
that is a big break.
they're still coming back and requesting this.
Right.
And where are they tonight? They're not here, but they want us to vote.
Right, they wrote a letter back to the board asking this question, and
Alan, have we had any survey work done over to landfill as it relates to this?
there's been a little bit of it, and some of that also related basically to the question of redefining a facility boundary. And that was really not done for any particular, how to describe this? One of the goals is to figure out what is the highest and best use for county land. And the original facility boundary was drawn many environmental regulations ago. And so we wanted to shrink this facility boundary as much as possible to maximize the amount of land that can be used for other purposes. One of those purposes might be, a shooting range or other businesses. But, we needed to go through and look at the work and see how do we shrink this based on these regulations now. And that's what's been done at this point.
And who paid for that, sir?
It comes out of the landfill budget.
What was the cost of that?
I would have to go look that up.
So the county paid for that.
We have an ongoing engineering budget. There's, regular contact with engineers, to.
So
Darlene, how much do we have an engineering budget?
He takes it out of professional services.
Okay.
Just go.
So we paid for a survey.
Yes, engineering budget of $5,000. Today we spent $33.50.
So we spent $33.50 and we had,
Well, now that doesn't include what we paid our attorney, because I saw a lease that was marked in red. I don't know how much we appreciate you very much.
I did work on it, I guarantee.
I don't know how much we paid you, but the number is growing. If we paid $3,300 for a survey and whatever to Donnie, our attorney.
But remember, the survey is not just for this. We've got hundreds of acres there
Yeah.
that we want to try to use effectively. So it's only to our interest to know what we can do with our property there. Literally, there are 400 and some acres there that we're not doing anything with.
And getting no tax.
So, yeah, and getting no tax benefit out of it at all. So it only makes sense for us to try to have in mind some use that can be made of that property, not necessarily firing range, but right now that land's just sitting there that the county has not used in decades.
So just to kind of catch everybody up, again, a good question, how did we get to this point? It is that, you know, when I sat down with solid waste director, engineers, you know, I said, look, step one is not to figure out how to put a shooting range in here. Step one, we need to get educated on, based on the current regulations, how do we minimize the amount of land we have to set aside to do this, to maximize the amount of land we can use for any other purpose. And one of the reasons it does look like we were talking about sell, lease, and then went to lease only is as we learned about this, you know, what we believe from the staff point of view to be okay, you know, shifted based on what we learned. Now, that, again, that's not specific to the shooting range. I believe we're at the point now where we know the options, we have a map, and can sit down and give you guys a good briefing on, hey, this is the rules and impact over here. This is a rule, which are very different. And then certainly that's a policy decision for the board to make. Is this really for, just because we can sell it, and we advise you from the staff point of view, this is a saleable thing, you can decide to keep it, you can lease it. Certainly I would really want you to understand the area that we do not recommend selling, that you understand why, because that's the big thing, that we preserve options for future. But when I sit down and start those meetings, I say, step one, we may find out that we can't do anything, we don't know. You know, we're not trying to fit one particular business in here. We're trying to, you know, maximum, because ultimately the goal here that the previous board had expressed was that we want to go through our county properties, highest and best use, and if we can get those back on the tax rolls, hey, that's a great thing.
So if, not to beat this
Sure.
survey to death,
Yeah.
but if this gun range had not come up, would we have spent $3,350 on a survey?
I believe so. You know, it might have affected the timing a little bit, but again, there's a discussion has been going on, and we'll have further discussions tonight on surplus county property. And one of the things, Donnie will back me up here, is that, you know, if we're going to sell a piece of property, we have to declare it excess, which is basically telling the world we have no more use for this piece of property. Well, figuring that out around the landfill is a little bit complex because there's a number of regulations, and, you know, we better get that right. And I believe we have. I believe we understand that, and I can, you know, work through that. But
Have we reviewed the deed when this was given to when the county purchased it, if it was to ever be used for anything other than a landfill? Do we in fact have the legal right to do anything other than maintain a landfill with that land that we purchased?
you know, if we've not got to that point, we're strictly on the deed or on the, you know, dealing with the Solid Waste Act. So if there is something in the deeds like this, that would be for legal review to, and that would probably be part of the actual declaring it excess.
Well, I mean, if we can't do anything with it other than a landfill, we don't even need to be discussing anything related to a survey or anything whatsoever. I mean, and I don't know.
Right.
But if it clearly states, as I have been told in the deed, that we can only use that property that was maybe originally leased, then purchased, or purchased and leased, I'm not sure. But that
It was purchased.
There was a restriction in there that if it ever was used for anything other than a landfill, I think it went back to the original folks. Is that right?
That is possible, yes.
County attorney, what about that?
That's before my time.
But
I'm not
what if
saying
when
that.
you buy something, can you put a restriction on it like that?
If the restriction is drafted appropriately, it can create either a condition or a reverter of the property. It depends upon the way the language is put in the deed.
I have some pertinent information about that.
Any discussion on the landfill? Excuse me.
Again, I think the discussion does bring up the point that there are a number of complexities about land around the landfill. And again, we started out this process from the staff point of view, that our number one priority is to protect and properly manage the liability the county has. I believe, that we've got that information, got a map we can brief you on, and certainly those are policy decisions for the board to make about what is acceptable use for any of that land. And, again, if we want to send a letter or a communication back to them, I prepared that just to have, a starting point, something to edit. And the basic gist of it is that, there's been an expressed desire to have a briefing, be able to ask questions. And,
This request would be if this was approved.
Oh, my recommendation is that, I would not directly answer that. I mean, I think it already has been answered, but, my letter just says, hey, we want to invite, set a date and invite you up. We had talked about having a public hearing or something like that and getting a briefing and letting you guys, ask questions and hear it directly.
Well, any more discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I would, if there's no further discussion, I'd like to make a motion that we terminate any future discussions with Motec Properties regarding any type of proposed shooting range, be it through a purchase or a lease, and that we communicate this to Motec as soon as possible. And I would ask that our attorney, Mr. Laws, handle that. That's the motion I would make.
I have a motion on the floor. Do I hear a second?
I will second that motion.
I have a motion on the floor and a second. Any discussion?
Anywhere? I mean, like if they wanted to put it anywhere in the county?
No, related to the landfill.
Don't we need to discuss this a little bit in closed session?
I'll amend my motion to say the Madison County landfill. Although, I will say, not as a part of my motion, but folks, nobody wants a landfill in their back. Excuse me. Nobody wants, I got that too in my backyard. Nobody wants a gun range in their backyard. Let's just be realistic about that. That's just clear as clear can be to me. And I'm a citizen. I'm also a commissioner. I know I'm a new commissioner. I'm the new kid on the block. I don't mean to cause any disturbances for anyone, but this is certainly not something that I can be in support of it in any way, shape, or form.
Discussion? Mr. Briggs?
Well, I just think, we need to talk about it and see what can be done, what can't be done with that property and so forth.
And that will come in the future. We will discuss the property. And we do want to do something with the property. I can sit here and think of several things that would be beneficial with the property. You know, a golf course, or anything that you could use the land for that would be beneficial to the county and to the public. My biggest concern is this 100-year lease that won't go away. They put us in a corner basically and say, the commissioners vote to decide if a combination purchase and 100-year lease agreement is acceptable. I have a motion on the floor, I have a second, that we do not proceed with this, and that's where we're at. Any more discussion? All right, I have a motion.
I'll just say, I'm going to vote against the motion. I'm going to vote against it, and I want to explain my vote for it. I'm not necessarily for the landfill, but we were going to have a public hearing on it. I wanted to hear people that were in favor of it, people who were against it, like I've done in this courtroom many times, and then make a decision on something. I've not heard from enough people yet. I know a lot of people don't want it, and I understand that is their position, and I wouldn't want if it was going to bother me as well. But I've not heard totally the other side, and so I think the motion is a little bit premature, so I'll be voting against it.
Well, I appreciate that and I understand that, but I think that MOTEC, the two gentlemen that are the corporation, have not been forthcoming with information. I feel like some of the commissioners have been left kind of out of the loop, as I may say, as far as what's going on and how it's being handled. I didn't even get to review the lease until the lease was laid in front of me, and that was on November the 21st when we actually had to discuss it. And I feel like the pushing of the 100-year lease, when we know that's not going to take place, why are we sitting here doing any discussion on it when we know we can't give them 100-year lease?
Well, I agree. We rejected that.
Well, then I'm not against a firing range in the county. I'm not against anything to betterment of the people or betterment of the county. But I am against this proceedings with MOTEC, which that is what the motion was made.
Well, it wasn't the only motion. He said they couldn't have a gun range. Why if somebody else wanted to come in? I'm not advocating that. But why if somebody else wanted to come in and put a gun range there?
Then it would be a clean slate start from that point.
Well, Katie said he couldn't have one. That's a motion on the floor.
His motion was for that MOTEC could not have one on the process.
He said, what's the motion?
Madam Clerk, would you do
Yeah.
that?
Motion to terminate any future discussion with MOTEC.
Okay.
Which does not restrict the property.
I have a motion and I have a second that we terminate this, any further discussion with MOTEC concerning the firing range on county property. All in favor of this, raise your right hand.
Yeah.
All opposed, raise your right hand. And Mr. Law, you understand, in that motion, it was asked that you send them a letter explaining the termination of this.
I will send them a letter as the motion was presented, and just for clarification, it was that we'll terminate all negotiations with MOTEC regarding lease of county property for a fire range.
Yes.
I'll prepare that letter.
Lease or sale.
Thank you. Okay, number 4.